Good afternoon, Indiana manufacturing leaders. Today we're tracking three developments that hit your material costs, your production continuity, and your power bill. First, President Donald Trump has overhauled metal tariffs. Starting April 6th, certain steel, aluminum, and copper imports will carry a 50% tariff. Second, FCC Indiana in Portland is warning that the vehicle supply chain for Ford and GM could collapse if a critical aluminum die casting supplier does not come back online under new terms. Third, Indiana's utilities are talking about modernizing the grid in and around Fort Wayne for a new energy era, which sounds forward-looking, but will eventually show up on your rates. Now, if you're running a manufacturing facility in Indiana, this is the backdrop for your next 12 to 24 months of sourcing, pricing, and capital planning. So let me give you one number to anchor all of this for you today, and that number is 50%. That is the new tariff rate on goods made almost entirely of aluminum, steel, or copper, effective April 6th, 2026. If you import steel coils, aluminum sheets, copper-heavy products, or other high metal content inputs from affected countries, you could see your landed cost shift by that kind of order in one single move. For a material that might already be tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars a month, that is not a small adjustment. It's a direct hit to your margin unless you rework your sourcing, your pricing, or both. If your operation depends on imported metals, the first story changes the math almost overnight. On April 2nd, 2026, President Donald Trump signed a proclamation adjusting Section 232, tariffs on steel, aluminum, and copper imports. Starting April 6th, goods made almost entirely of these metals, like steel coils and aluminum sheets, face a 50% tariff. Derivative articles, like steel cooking appliances, now carry a 25% levy. There's also a 15% tariff for certain metal-intensive industrial and electrical equipment through 2027, while goods with 15% or less metal content are now exempt. For Indiana manufacturers, that means three things. First, if you rely on imported steel, aluminum, copper, or downstream products with high metal content, your material costs are going up unless you change something. Second, while agreements with the UK, EU, Japan, and South Korea remain, the higher rates and broader coverage for other origins can change which suppliers are competitive and which are not. Third, the process that used to handle derivative product inclusions has been removed. Now, cabinet officials can expand coverage on a rolling basis, which adds some level of uncertainty for long-term planning. So what should you watch? Watch the specific harmonized tariff schedule codes that apply to your key materials and components. Watch for any guidance from the U.S. Department of Commerce on how they plan to handle new derivative inclusions. And here's the question for your team. Which of our imported raw material components will be subject to new 50% or 25% tariffs? And what is our immediate plan to mitigate these cost increases? The second story is centered in Jay County and should have every automotive supplier's attention. FCC Indiana, a Portland-based manufacturer of clutch assemblies for Ford Motor Company and General Motors, has filed an emergency motion in U.S. bankruptcy court. They are warning that the vehicle supply chain faces imminent collapse if their critical supplier, Michigan-based aluminum die casting company Pace Industries, does not resume shipments of essential parts. Now, Pace Industries is in Chapter 11 bankruptcy and is demanding an immediate $4 million payment plus a 36% price increase from FCC. For Indiana manufacturers, that is a live demonstration of how fragile the automotive supply chain can be. One supplier's bankruptcy and pricing demands can ripple through multiple tiers and threaten production lines for major automakers. If those lines stop, it's not just the supplier that hurts, it's every operation tied to that production program, up and down the supply chain. You see the risk of downtime, lost revenue, and strained relationships, not only for Ford and GM, but for the Indiana facilities that support them. So what should you watch? Watch how the U.S. Bankruptcy Court rules on FCC Indiana's emergency motion. Watch for any follow-up motions or settlements between FCC and Pace Industries. And then turn that spotlight inward with this question. Who are our single source critical suppliers, and what are our immediate contingency plans if one of them faces bankruptcy or demands sudden price increases? Now, let's move on to Allen County and Fort Wayne and talk about the grid. Danielle McGrath, president of the Indiana Energy Association, has said that Indiana's electric grid, including infrastructure in Fort Wayne, needs significant investment and modernization to meet today's economic needs. Yes, Indiana's utilities have invested in advanced technology, smart metering, and environmental protection, but a lot of the wires, transformers, substations, and generation units they depend on are decades old and need replacement or upgrades. For Indiana manufacturers, especially in and around Fort Wayne, this is about reliability and cost. On the reliability side, modernization can reduce outages and improve power quality for your operation. That protects your equipment and your production schedule. But on the cost side, the money for grid upgrades will eventually be recovered from all customer classes, including you, commercial and industrial users. So you can expect rate adjustments over time as utilities take their grid plans to the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission. So what should you watch? Watch future rate case filings by Indiana utilities that seek cost recovery for grid modernization projects. Look for how those filings describe the split between residential, commercial, and industrial customers in terms of cost recovery load. And ask your team, how will anticipated grid modernization investments and potential rate adjustments impact our long-term energy budget? And what energy efficiency programs can we leverage now? So let's tie these threads together. You have a 50% tariff on certain metal imports starting April 6th, changing the economics of your materials sourcing. You have FCC Indiana in Portland sounding the alarm that the vehicle supply chain for Ford and GM could break if a single aluminum die casting supplier does not resume shipments under new terms. You have Indiana's utilities saying the grid in and around Fort Wayne needs major investment, which may improve reliability, but will eventually show up in your rates. For Indiana manufacturers, schools, and municipalities, that is material cost pressure, supply chain fragility, and future energy cost and reliability shifts all at the same time. Now, obviously, I don't run your plant. You do. But my real job as the CEO of Tactical Energy Group is to stay on top of everything that changes the cost and reliability of your power and the economics of making things in Indiana so we can build the right products and programs for the manufacturing community. While I'm doing that work anyway, this brief is my way of giving you as much of that insight as I possibly can so you can spend more time running your operation and less time trying to decode bills, rate cases, and headlines. So let me give you a few questions you can take straight into your morning huddle today or tomorrow. If you cannot answer these, it is a signal that you're flying blind on the issues we just covered. First, given the new tariffs on metal imports and the fragility of critical supply chains, how are we stress testing our material sourcing strategy for the next 12 to 24 months? Second, what are our immediate and long-term strategies for managing energy costs, considering both future grid modernization investments and how we use energy in our facility today? Third, beyond our direct suppliers, where are we exposed to issues coming from their sub-suppliers, especially those in financially precarious situations like Pace Industries? If you get clear answers to those questions, you will be ahead of most of your peers who only react after something changes or breaks. If this helped you see today's news through the lens of your operation instead of just as another headline, share it with another Indiana operator who needs to be ahead of the curve on these things. If you want this kind of context without digging through filings and court motions yourself, make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss these briefs. I'm Daniel Burke. This is TEG Daily, and I will see you on Monday.